Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wood Tones episode here. I know it's been a while since the last one, my bad. But anywho, the bass neck is still coming along. I'm still planning on doing a video for that, but I think it's going to take me just a little bit longer. I might have accidentally deleted some of the files that I needed for the neck blank, and since the neck is already past that point, I can't exactly go back in time and record that. So anyway, I'll figure that out. That should be up in a week or two, theoretically. But anyway, since this is a channel all about instrument building, I thought it would also be good to show some other parts. This time, working on a top for a 5-string bass. Because why not? You always need more bass. But anyway, I thought it would be good to show the steps going through of how to take the raw wood blank here and turn it into a top for an instrument. So, have the wood all cut out here. This is just a Western Redcedar board from Menards. Got it, cut it out. If you pick through the wood there, or at a local hardware store, not sponsored. If you pick through the wood there at your hardware store, it doesn't have to be Menards, could be anywhere, not sponsored by the way. You should be able to find some pretty good wood there. This board is not quarter sawn weld, it's a lot of cupping grain. It doesn't show up on the camera well, but the grain is not quarter sawn, which is a bummer, but it's doable. But you're looking for tight, straight grains here. You can hardly see the grain lines. That's what you want, a lot of them. And when you hold the board, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but you can hear a ringing to it instead of a dink, instead of something like that dead noise. You want it to ring when you hold it. And listen to the tone. That'll tell you a lot about what the top is going to sound like. So anywho, got the board picked out from the store, got it trimmed to length, and now got to cut it up into slabs to glue together. So what I have found is that from the store, the edges here are not straight. I know, big shocker. But you can actually remedy that pretty easily by what I would do is either use a table saw or a joiner planer, or both. You can, first step is actually to smooth this edge. I'm going to have this white side try and be my center line. There, so this far edge right down here, am I on camera? Yep. So this edge right over here, this is going to be the side on the outside of the guitar, on the outside of the top. So I actually want this edge smooth because I'm going to be using a table saw to straighten this edge. And to get this edge as straight as possible, this has to be straighter than what it comes as. So anyway, I'm going to cut that out on the table saw. 1 second. Alright, so for this cut here, make sure you're wearing hearing protection whenever working with power tools. But anyway, for this you want to just take a hair off the wood, maybe 1/16 of an inch or less if you can. You just want to scrape the surface smooth with the table saw blade, or at least as smooth as you can get it. Like I said, you can also use a joiner planer. I have done that. But table saw is what I got handy at the moment, so I'll go ahead and use that. Either one works perfectly. So, here we go. Sorry about the noise. So now that this edge here, the far edge, is as flat as I can get it, next I'm going to hold that smooth edge up against the table saw fence here, nudge it in a hair. The edges started splintering away on this board, so I'm going to cut off a bit more than I would normally. Might lose all of the white, unfortunately, but it's a sad consequence. You gotta cut down to where there's good wood. Like, you can see right here, it started chipping away, splintering right here. There's a big piece coming off. You don't want any of that, so I'm gonna trim that away. and it will leave me with a nice smooth edge. So again, sorry about the noise. So I'm going to leave the camera down here because next I'm going to actually cut out these slabs from this board. So I'm also going to be using the table saw for this again, and a lot of people use a bandsaw. If you have a bandsaw that can fit the board, I'd recommend using that. I do not, so I'm going to use the table saw. So this top is going to be for a bass, and basses, as a general rule of thumb, are under a lot more tension than guitars, so because of that, the top has to be a bit thicker. If you build it as thin as a guitar, the instrument's going to explode the moment you bring it up to any of the strings up to tension, and that is what you call a bad thing. So on guitars, normally you want the top, if you're using Western Redcedar, somewhere roughly around 2.25 millimeters in thickness. But because this is a bass, I'm going to take the top thickness up to 3 millimeters. So, show you here. That thick. I know it's blurry as all get out, but it's not really that big. So, what you want to do is you want to take your ruler, try and show way over here, and mark out on the top where you want where 3 millimeters is away from the edge, or however thick you're going to have the board. Always, as a rule of thumb, if you're cutting out slabs like I am, have the board cut out a little thicker than you need, because as you're cutting it, if you're on a table saw, the blade is going to wobble a bit, or the board's going to wobble a little. Blade thickness could be a hair off what you expect, and you're going to thin the board down a little bit anyway and smooth it all out, so make sure to have excess. Unless you got a board stretcher handy, in which case you're lucky. So, let's slide the rail over. You want to line up with your line and cut just a hair more than the line is. Make sure to double check everything right before you start. Hate to cut it wrong and have to start over. I actually marked a bit way too thick than I wanted. That is why you double check. So, let's line it all up. Do hair adjustments here. And sink the saw blade for the first pass. If you're cutting it with the table saw, the first pass you want the saw blade pretty low in the groove, just because there's nowhere for the chips to blow out as it's cutting it. So you want the saw blade itself to cut a small channel so there's not a lot of chips and sawdust as it cuts through, but the next couple of passes there's already a groove for chips to fly out on both sides of the blade, so you can go a bit higher than that and the first cut. But here we go again, sorry about the noise. So, just made the first cut. The top is quite a bit thicker than I'd want, but I'm going to plane it down, so that's okay. So you don't have to move the fence once you start the cut. You can jack the saw blade up now. Bite off a bit more this time. Spruce or cedar, whichever board you're using, is a softer wood, so the saw blade won't bind up as much in it, as opposed to something like hickory or oak or maple. So if it's a softer wood, you can bite off a bit more with the saw blade. Alright, so I have now cut one half of this board off here. If you look at the end, you can see the saw cut goes over halfway. So once you get to this point, the saw blade on your table saw should start maxing out and you can't raise it any higher. So what you want to do is just flip the board over. Make sure to keep the thin side on the left or right, whichever side you decide to cut it on. Drop the saw blade. Sit back to where you made your first cut, about that same height. And without adjusting the fence or anything, just flip the board over to the fresh side. Line it up with the fence and cut that, and your groove should line up. So here we go. And just like that, we now have a board. One piece of the top. I'm going to try and get 3 out of this. If I'm lucky, I might be able to get 4. So I'm going to repeat those steps over. It's the same for each one. Just move the fence over, mark on the board how wide you're cutting, then line it up, cut a hair extra, flip it over, cut the other side, and you should have, just keep running down the board that way and you'll get all the sides or all the pieces cut out. So I'm gonna do that and see you on the other side of that. So I actually got 4 pieces out of this cedar board here, so I got lucky enough. The edges are a bit thinner than I'd want them to be, but that's okay. We'll deal with that later, and the edges of an instrument's top are thinner anyway, so that all works out in my favor. So here's the 2 boards from the thicker part that I cut, and they are book matched. Should be just like that. Yep, there we go. So now comes the actual gluing portion. Well, just before that, you want to check and make sure the top is still pretty good, pretty straight. And to do that, you take it and you can hold it up to a light and look down the edge. If you see any light through it, you know it's not a tight gap. There is a bit of light showing right through the middle. The board moved a little bit after I cut it. So, I'm going to pull out my shooting board that I made and line that up here just a hair off the edge. So the way the shooting board works is it holds a thin piece of wood flat down on a table and lets you plane the edge of it so you can get a straight edge for gluing. So a lot of guitar makers use this. Some have different methods, but this is the way I do it. And so for this, you want a big old block or bench plane for this. I had to remake the handle, but you want a big bench plane for it. The longer the better, so that way as you're planing, there's a lot less chance of it warping or dipping down anywhere. So what you want to do is take the plane and make sure the blade is sharp. Just gently press into the edge and all the way down. So when I held it up to the light, I saw that the 2 ends were touching, but the center itself was not. So I'm going to take 1 pass at each end just to lower that a smidgy more than the rest. There we go. And then you can check it. Check your work, see how you're doing. Make sure to always constantly be looking. You don't want it to end up you playing way too far and have to correct for your mistakes. Usually I'd say like every 1 to 2 passes, check and see. There we go. And check it again. But because we use the table saw and joiner planer, it is mostly done already. Just a little bit of fine tuning left. So now I'm working on the other piece on the same edge, the one that's going to be glued. It's getting there. Slowly but surely. Using a shooting board, straightening this edge does take some time and a bit of patience. Once you get good at it, you can get it done pretty fast, but you don't want to rush it. It's rushing when you rush, you make mistakes. Let's check it one more time. This should be good. Alright, I am happy with this. So, it's a tight joint. And let's get the shooting board out of the way. Now it actually comes time to start gluing. So let's move my block plane. Blow off all these crumbs. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I use aluminum foil to glue the top down because for whatever reason, I found the parchment paper, I think the glue that I use, the water in it, actually seeps through the parchment paper and reacts with the iron of the table saw table here. But water can't get through the foil, so that's why I use it. So there is the two pieces, and I have actually, to glue it down, I have made myself some clamping cauls. So, and I'll find the other one in a second. But anyway, these clamps are very, very simple. It's just a block of wood, cut out a little edge and an angle on it. So that way, as you hold it up against the board, the angled part here on the vertical edge wants to tilt the block this way because the clamp, as you put pressure, wants to tilt it this way. The angle holds it straight. So you just put it there, and then it gives you a big surface to clamp against, and the width of the block helps to distribute the force and keep this edge protected. So you just line up your clamps here, and also have your glue handy. Alright, so found the other clamp. Actually, TBH had to remake it, to be honest. But anyway, like I said, it's dead simple to make, so you can just churn them out from scraps of wood. So now it actually comes time to glue. Got 6 clamping cauls, and I will use 3 clamps. Make sure to have them nearby, because once the glue is on, the timer starts. And once that glue sets, you got whatever you got. There is no going back. So the glue I'm using, just regular wood glue. People use hide glue for this. I like hide glue. It's clear under a finish. It works well and it's reversible. But for just ease, I'm using just regular yellow wood glue. So what I do is, since this piece is kind of big, I can squeeze it just on one edge. Helps keep the cleanup simple and still gets enough glue in the joint. Just run the glue along the edge here, leaving it a bit thick since I'm only doing it on one piece. And just spread it all the way out. Now, don't rub it in with your finger. That tends to push way too much off. Instead, just set it down on the table and slide the other piece up to it. And once they touch, just wiggle it back and forth for a second to spread all that glue around. There. Then just line up the cauls. And got the clamps here ready to go. That's why it's always good to be prepared. Or like me, just panic at the last second. These clamps, one downside is they are a little finicky. They do tend to slip off the edge of the board a bit. So to work with that, just place some weight right on the edge or right on the clamp itself, on the block. And that should alleviate most of the lifting problem. I'm just going to rotate this, get a bit more room out of it. So you just go down the board here, tighten it up. You don't want a ton of pressure, too much, and you'll start squeezing the glue out, actually. Place some weight on that to hold it flat. Too little pressure, the glue is too thin, the glue is just given too much room and isn't pressed together close enough to form a great bond. So too thin is kind of bad. Too much pressure, you can squeeze too much glue out. So don't want to go too thin, don't want to go too thick. But anyway, that is the top. You just kind of want it pretty tight. The pieces should hold by themselves, the clamps. And the bottle on the glue says to let the joint sit for 30 minutes and then it should be good. But today it's really warm and humid, so the glue is going to take a bit longer to cure. I'm going to give it about 2 hours or so, probably, just to be safe. A little longer is better than a little too short. So that is the top joint, and then once this dries, you just go down the line, keep gluing on the other boards until you got your full top. So I'll probably do a quick montage of that here, but that is it. I'll see you once the whole top is done.
2,000 years later.
Alright, so it's been about an hour and a half. It should be good now. You can go ahead unclamp it. I wouldn't stress it too much at this point. The glue is still curing, so it's good to unclamp and start adding on the next pieces, but I wouldn't plane it or thin it at all just yet. You don't want the glue line breaking apart. So, like I said, just continue the process with the next board. Let's peel off that and just set it down right about here. And the next board I'm going to glue on is this one. The only thing to watch out for is make sure you are book matching the pieces here. This one's a good fit. I'm going to leave it as is. I don't need to thin it. But make sure you are book matching the pieces so that it goes together very smooth and cleanly. Alright, there it is. So, just like with the first two pieces, get your glue out. Spread it somewhat thick along one edge here. You can go a little thinner. It doesn't have to be incredibly thick. After all, too much glue is bad. Alright, slipped on the thing a little bit. Having a hard time getting glue on such a thin edge, but there we go. Got it done. Set the piece with the glue down and slide the unglued section to it. Wiggle it for a second to spread the glue. And line up your clamping cauls. And just like the first piece, just clamp her up. Again, you want it tight, like a good hand tight, but you're not wringing the life out of this. So just give it a couple twists. Because it's a little bigger of a piece now, the edges will fold up a bit more than when you're gluing the first piece. But it's not too much of a problem. Just again, put weight down on the edge and you should be a-okay. Alright, there's the one. Now when I put the pieces together, I saw that the center of this second board I'm adding on was a bit higher than the edges. So keeping that in mind, you want to clamp the edges somewhat tight, but when it comes to the center, squeeze that one a bit harder. Some people do legitimately join tops this way, leaving a slight gap in the center because it helps with the joining. Helps, at least if the edges are held, you can push the center together, but if the center is the only thing touching, the edges won't hold and it'll peel apart, but the center will stay clamped well, and once you add braces, it will be fine. So, like I was saying, just repeat the process for the second piece here, and I'll probably meet you once I got the last one glued on too. Gotta wait another hour and a half. Alright, so while that's gluing, I thought I'd show off. This is what it should end up like. Most joining methods will work the same way and you'll end up with the exact same product. Had to get the camera cap out of the way. But anyway, you end up with a big old piece of wood like this. It's strong, the glue lines hold. You don't want to flex it too much because it is still pretty thin, but the glue holds the pieces together and it's ready for thinning and smoothing out. So that is what you will end up with. I think that's going to be this episode. I'm not just showing this off to show off or whatnot, but this is actually going to be the back of the bass that I'm making, the 5-string bass, and I'll probably show off bracing the back in the next episode. So thanks so much for watching. If you're following along at home, let me know in the comments, and I hope this was entertaining, useful, or educational to view. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see the next episode whenever it comes out, hopefully it won't be another 5-month span, go ahead, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell too, because otherwise you won't get notified, because apparently subscribing is not enough anymore for YouTube. But anyway, I'm rambling. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Take care.